This is a State of the Union episode. First, actually, I'm doing explicitly calling it a State of the Union episode. I've done this before. We generally talk about the way we see the world, the way we see the macro environment impacting our portfolio. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So obviously, it makes sense to have something like a State of the Union. And the reason this is important is also, again, for the listeners that want to learn about how it feels. It's really important to emphasize the word feels, because I can't teach you how to run a fund, and I shouldn't. Maybe it's even illegal. But what I can try to convey to you is the importance of internalizing this business, of being with it and understanding what it means to take risk, what it means to go through the motion, to have exposure. All these things, all these words, we learn them in business school and so on and so forth. And they mean nothing until you actually do it. The comparison is, you can learn jiu-jitsu on YouTube, but unless you've been in a sparring fight with a guy, and let's assume he's the same level like you are, you're not going to know what it means. Another analogy would be, I don't know, you can watch people making love to each other, but certainly not the same thing like being involved in an act like that. So it's kind of like that, okay? Now, I hope I'm not going too far here, and don't lose me. I'm going to try to be practical. The purpose here is to be practical, because we just don't have the luxury to talk about, there's so many seminars and business schools and self-improvement and all that stuff. You can go there and listen to people talk to you about, you need to understand your risk tolerance and blah, 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 which means nothing. So the purpose here is to give practical guidance, to have people understand what it means, how it feels to run a hedge fund. So this State of the Union is an attempt to give a general overview of how we feel about things, what matters, and how they impact our portfolio. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's September 25th, 2022. This is Krim Delko. It's a Sunday. There's no update for the year. We're down 33.2%. The market's down 23.4%. We're underperforming by 9.8%. Now, obviously, this performance is way off the charts when it comes to what we can tolerate and how we run the fund and what we think we should be doing here and all that stuff. So having said that, we have at least one good reason, one good news, and that is we understand why this is the case. And the reason this is the case is that the Federal Reserve of the United States has decided to go from soft money to hard money. So what does that mean? So the Federal Reserve under Jay Powell has literally pivoted away from this free money, free-for-all period that started with Ben Bernanke in Syria. It started before, but definitely under Ben Bernanke in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And back then, the goal was to save the economy from collapse. And that created moral hazard, that created this self-fulfilling prophecy that, well, the Fed's just always going to ease, and so on and so forth. Now, this has stopped. This has stopped for some reason. And it's very interesting to know why. And I'm going to talk about this. But for some reason, the Federal Reserve has decided to stop, to go with hard money. And here's why. This is, I think, where we differ from pretty much anybody else. We believe that the Federal Reserve is actually in competition with Bitcoin, or generally with the concept of hard money and the concept of a more Austrian economy. So what does that mean? I just went through a thought experiment yesterday, and I want to elaborate on the thought experiment and then explain what I mean with that. Imagine a thought experiment where you have an East United States and a West United States, and we separate them at the intercontinental divide. So and the analogy is East Germany, West Germany. So we have, instead of a wall, we just have the Rocky Mountains, and we have East and West. And the East stays the way it is, meaning we have Washington, D.C., we have Wall Street, we have the dollar, we have our elite universities in the Northeast, we have the law firms in New York City, blah, 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 blah. The West applies Bitcoin as a currency, but also underlines its economy on the Bitcoin protocol and drives a hard money / Austrian economy. Now, let me quickly elaborate. I mean, this is a book worth of content now. What is an Austrian economy? What is hard money? Read the Bitcoin standard, read Fiat, the Fiat standard. Both books are, I think, some of the best economics books that I'm actually reading the Bitcoin standard. I haven't read the Fiat standard, but it's a very interesting book. His name eludes me now. I think the last name is Amon. He's this guy he used to be a professor of economics. Now he's a Bitcoin guy. He goes around, gives podcasts and all that stuff. He's a little bit of a drama queen. I think he has a nail that, he has a hammer that fits every nail kind of thing. So everything for him is now about, it's because of monetary policy. The world has evolved the way it has evolved because of monetary policy. That's not necessarily true, but there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. But the Bitcoin standard has a lot of real economic theory and very, very important concepts. Anyway, back to the concept of the West United States. Imagine them based on the Bitcoin standard. Now, where would that lead us? Imagine how would that world evolve? And I'm saying, I'm happy to put my money down that after 70 years, which is roughly the same amount that the German experiment lasted, East and West Germany, we would have a massive, massive difference in wealth, in science, in knowledge, in pretty much any metric you wanna measure between the East and the West. And the West would outperform the East by a lot. You would have immigration, you would have all that stuff. People would go find opportunity in the West, and so on and so forth. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, I think Jay Powell and the Fed are facing this type of competition. It's still virtual in the sense that there's no state or no government or no geographical area declaring itself, we're going on the Bitcoin standard. I mean, there's obviously El Salvador, but that's a different conversation, because what it means to be on the Bitcoin standard doesn't just mean you apply the hard money, okay? It applies also that you delegate institutional power to the network. You try to deauthorize as much as you can in the economy, make it more meritocratic, I think is the word. In general, find ways to reorganize your society such that the network and the decentralized decision-making process takes over when it comes to deciding what is and what isn't. This is the key. And I've spoken about this before. This shift away from an authoritative economy, and we have an authoritative economy, like it or not. Why do we have an authoritative economy? Well, we have presidents, we have lawyers, we have all kinds of institutions that have the power to determine what is and what isn't, versus in a decentralized Bitcoin standard type economy, that will be less the case. And it is my belief that the Federal Reserve is actually implicitly competing with the threat of something like that. And when I say competing, I don't just mean in a way that they want to avoid it and so on and so forth. They also might want to actually adapt. So maybe the Fed is pivoting and saying, look, why should we let this new system take over and take away our power? Why don't we just adapt and incorporate some of their ideas into our thinking? And the consequence of that would be that we have hard money. A lot of things in the economy are actually going the right way. We have the Federal Reserve turning off the tap, deleveraging the economy. We have some excesses that were driven by the woke movement and the left-wing extremists in the United States being reversed. Some good, some bad. I don't want to go into politics. This is not a politics podcast. But nevertheless, for example, one of the big problems particularly during COVID and post-COVID was the fact that people don't want to work, and they also think that they, let's say, should not pay rent and they should not be liable for their expenses and all that kind of stuff, which has led to supply chain disruption, workflow disruption, problems with businesses actually being able to hire people, all that kind of stuff. So we hope, I think what Governor DeSantis is doing, sending immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, you can argue about this in many ways, and certainly a lot of the stuff that happened down there in Florida and Texas is not clean in any way, but it's actually common sense. Well, you guys are the liberals who want all these open policies. Well, then take them. People in Marin County, here where I live in the north, I mean in the Bay Area. I live in Silicon Valley. I used to live in San Francisco, and the people in Marin County, they want all the beauties of a flourishing economy, but they don't want the homeless people. They don't want nothing. Marin County is the whitest place in the world. It's segregated. You can't build anything there. But they're all voting on the left-wing side of the spectrum. So God forbid you touch the homeless people or you do something against them on the streets of San Francisco. But as long as they're not on my street, it's fine. So all these policies are terrible hypocrisy. It's taking advantage of poor people, taking advantage of the misery of people for your own benefit. Because those, I call them hypocrites, those left-wing hypocrites who claim that they're whatever, Democrat and tolerant, they live in sheltered houses, send their kids to private schools. They want nothing. My family, my son goes to public school here in Los Altos. He is around incredibly smart Asian immigrants. He's around normal people of all colors and races. And that's what I believe is real inclusion. Inclusion doesn't mean I send my child to private school, but then I send them once a year to the soup kitchen to give food to the poor in the streets of San Francisco. That's hypocrisy. Anyway, this is not a politics podcast. This is a State of the Union podcast, State of the Economic Financial Union, of course. And what I'm saying is that we're going to have midterm elections, a huge right-wing shift in US politics, no question about that. We're going to have Chinese elections, which is hopefully going to turn to the better, because we feel that in China there's a problem with the problem in China is that I believe, this is conjecture, I'm only anecdotal evidence, but we have a power struggle between Beijing and Shanghai. Shanghai is the economic power hub of China, and like anywhere else in history, when you have money, when you have economic power, you want political power, and Beijing is not willing to give that up. We have that power struggle happening as we speak in China, and of course that's a big what's going to happen there. I don't have the answer, but what I can say is the following. So far, China has been a very pragmatic leadership. The Chinese leadership has been incredibly pragmatic and successful. And no matter what you think about the Communist Party in general in China, they've been pragmatic. They've been prosperity under the constraint of we stay in power. Now, I've just had a conversation this morning with my partner about this. I believe that China has gone up too far, the Maslow hierarchy here. So meaning that further advances are not going to be possible without giving up some political power. Because, what I mean with the Maslow hierarchy is just simply you have this concept of, people, let's say they're poor, and then they're less poor and less poor and less poor. And once they reach a level of wealth, they're going to start thinking about, well, my kids should maybe have a more balanced life. Maybe my kids should not just be engineers, shut up and calculate. Maybe they should think about what's the fabric of reality, read books, philosophy, literature. That's the kind of stuff that you don't do when you're poor. That's the kind of stuff you do when you're less poor. And China is less poor now. And it's a natural progress. People want to have meaning. People want to have purpose. Having said all of that, how does that tie into our fund? Well, the thing is, we have a few situations that are extremely interesting. One is the strength of the dollar. Okay, the strength of the dollar is hurting us in the sense that we have exposure through Tesla internationally, and therefore we should be shorting currencies against the dollar. We haven't done that yet. We might do that. And I don't want to talk necessarily about positioning here. It's just a thought that is worth having. The dollar is going to continue to strengthen. It is my prediction that the euro will go to between 50 and 60 cents to the dollar. This is an extreme move. The reason that is one of the predictions I have here is the following. First, I think the dollar strength has not stopped. Jay Powell has not. As long as Jay Powell is tightening and going towards hard money, if the US dollar succeeds in becoming a hard money currency, if the perception in the market is such that the dollar is not just the reserve currency of the world, but also the hard currency of the world, if there is even a slight chance of the US dollar becoming more like the Swiss franc, we're going to see the yen at, above 2, going to have a 3 handle in front, 300, something like that. We're going to see the euro going to 50 cents. Now, this all hinges on the debt to GDP ratio of the United States. And the reason I'm optimistic for the dollar and pessimistic for the rest of the world is because we all have debt around the world. Every government has loaded up on debt. But the only economy which has the potential for innovation and wealth creation is the United States. This is another prediction. So the second prediction, which is related to the first one. The only economy which has a chance to reduce its debt to GDP ratio without a lot of pain is the US, because we can do it organically. We don't have to lower our living standards. In fact, we just have to keep doing what we're doing. Attract the best talent, attract capital, innovate, create companies. If Tesla market cap goes from 800 billion to 3 trillion, that's 2 trillion of market cap creation. You add a couple of other companies, Apple and maybe Microsoft, and all of a sudden you're looking at a 5-6 trillion just by these. I'm not even talking about startups here and the potential for new wealth creation. If we compare that to the potential of wealth creation in Europe, it's not just that Europe will not match that, of course. Europe will not even stay the same. It is my conjecture that in dollars, Europe will become poorer because Europe just doesn't have, it doesn't have enough freedom. That's the key. I've said that many times in this podcast. Freedom and wealth are the same thing, just the same side, different sides of the same coin. There's not enough freedom in Europe. There is wealth in Europe, but there's no wealth creation in Europe. Europeans will become relatively poorer. It's going to reflect in the currency. It's going to also reflect, of course, in the lifestyles. Again, China is a wild card. China has the potential. China certainly has the iterative power, the will, the desire, the hard work, the talent, all of these things, but they don't have the freedom. So if they don't have the freedom, they will also become relatively poorer. We have the freedom. We fought for the freedom for 250 years, but we also fought even harder, I would say, in the last couple of years. We fought for freedom and we won. The winners of the Civil War, this is another prediction, this is another restatement, that COVID was another US Civil War, fortunately without almost no casualties. If you skip some, I think there were some casualties in the Black Lives Matter movement and so on and so forth, but there were no big casualties, and that's a good thing. But what I'm saying here is the Civil War which were fought, it was more of an intellectual war. It wasn't a hot war with weapons, which is a good thing, but nevertheless it was a war. And the winners, it was collectivism versus freedom. COVID was just a catalyst. Fauci was just a catalyst. COVID wasn't invented so we can have collectivism in the United States. There's a tendency to collectivism as expressed people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and so on and so forth. And we, the people that stand for freedom, have won. There's no question about it. If you had a vote, any kind of referendum, or if you just want to have the midterms as a proxy, whatever you use in the political marketplace, the answer to the question who has won that war is unequivocally, okay, I can't spell that word, I can't pronounce it. It is absolutely clear. The winner is freedom. Freedom is the winner. US has always stood for freedom. By the way, the hot civil war was for freedom too. It was the other way around. It was the people that now have lost, meaning the more northern, liberal, Northeastern. This time they lost. because this time it's the freedom that the much, much more important freedom than, let's say, all these questions about equality and all that stuff, the freedom of actually deciding for yourself, that kind of freedom, which we fought for and we won. The popularity of people like DeSantis, even Trump, and so on and so forth is testament. We'll see it again. We'll see it in the midterms. This is a prediction. This is a statement and a prediction. The statement is that there was a civil war that started with COVID, and that the civil war has been won by the people who stand for freedom as defined as we want to decide for ourselves versus collectivism. So how is this all going to impact our portfolio? What I'm saying is we're going to have a political shift to the right, which will strengthen the US. It's already happening. We have, like I said, the Fed doing the right things, the Supreme Court doing a lot of things to reverse collectivist tendencies in this country. And we have this incredible, incredible power that we still have, which is our innovation. Now, on a very different topic, non-political, why am I so optimistic about the innovative power of the United States? You might say, well, who are you? I mean, innovation has been stifled in the last, let's say, 20 years. Some people might say that, some people might disagree with that. Now, I don't necessarily want to discuss the last 20 years of innovation. I think there's a lot of metrics that would support the fact that we had a lot of innovation. But I want to say one thing which is important, and I spoke about this a couple of episodes ago, which is why am I so optimistic about the next 10 years of innovation? I believe we're going to have a massive step change in the rapid speed of innovation. One is all the political backdrop I just said, the success of freedom in this civil war that I mentioned, this intellectual civil war between collectivism and freedom. The other is the fact that the compute stack is changing. Now, sorry for all the non-technical people, I'm going to get a little technical. So the compute stack, what that means is the stack, which is, if you take a, Comp Sci 101, people will talk about the stack, which is, imagine the physical hardware, the transistors, and then the gates, and then what's called the microarchitecture, and then we have the instruction set architecture, and then we have the program, and then we have algorithms and problems. So if you take the stack, if you have, let's say, the problem of I want to drive my car and I want the computer to drive my car, that is a problem. Then we have an algorithm, a program, and so on and so forth, all the way down to the actual physical layer of implementation of that problem through computation. That's what I mean with compute stack. And the compute stack is changing dramatically across the stack. Whenever that happens, wealth creation gets a huge boost. This is just how our economy works. I've been at a presentation a couple of years ago where somebody showed me that Moore's law actually started way before Jordan Moore defined it. In other words, computation has always been advancing in human society, and some people might argue that this is actually proof that wealth is driven by computation. Now, I support that, and I even have an explanation for that. And the reason is that computation is just a much faster way to iterate. Or in other words, if you want a shortcut to iteration, that's what computation is. I've spoken about this in the context of Chiara Marletto and the science of Can and Can't. That's where I got inspired. Think about it this way. What is computation? Why do we humans do computation? Well, we just want to have a quick shortcut in figuring out what works and what doesn't. Let's say, let me try to find an example. Let's see, should I go and surf tomorrow, right? How do I decide? It's about a 50-minute drive from here to Half Moon Bay where I surf. How do I do that? Well, I can just go and just go every day and then have a pattern, let's say, and then in a couple of years I'll have a pattern, and then I realize that maybe around October the chances for me to have a good surf experience are very high, and if I go around I think May or June, they're pretty low. I can do that, or I can try to model the weather through computation and use computation to quickly iterate, in a sense, do all the computations that are necessary to do a hypothetical weather for tomorrow, and then get a result which will tell me that the weather might be X, and we might have waves Y, and therefore you should go or not go. In other words, I can save myself energy, time, resources just by doing epic computation. Now, this applied to the economy, this applied to the rest of the world, the business, to anything you want that is relevant to you in the world. I think it should open up people's eyes and minds to the fact that if we change the compute stack, we can increase our living standards, which is another word for wealth creation. You can save energy, you can save resources, you can deploy them somewhere else. That's what wealth creation is. So changing the compute stack. Now, what does that mean practically? It just means that because of the change of the compute stack, Tesla is able to do the self-driving car. Tesla is able to find better ways to solve material science problems. Tesla can solve material science problems on the battery side as well as on the solar side. Tesla can solve problems of networking and let's say the distribution of energy problems through computation. So computation helps on every level, and because we have this dramatic change within the compute stack, a lot of new markets will open up. This is what I mean with innovation. We have all the applications of AI and the compute stack on the genomic front. Again, our CRISPR index is exposed to that. And then we have also the change in the compute stack, or the change in the compute paradigm, which is driven by blockchain. So we have three big changes in compute stack in our portfolio, which is Bitcoin, which changes in blockchain. We have CRISPR, which is a change in the compute stack. In fact, in biology, we also have a change in the biology stack where we are going down to the level of the genes and we're able to read and manipulate them much better, which is, I've compared them often to the transistor, and I've concluded that the change in the compute stack of biology will just help us digitize the biology, life sciences, which is one of the biggest themes that we have within the CRISPR side of our portfolio. Then, of course, change the compute stack will affect Tesla. Tesla is a software on wheels type company, is actually an energy on wheels, software on wheels type company. So a lot of things. To summarize, the big picture ideas that we have here, sitting here at the end of the third quarter of 2022, is that innovation will accelerate. The US is going towards a hard money economy, which will propel the US to an extremely strong economic model. And relative to the rest of the world, that will mean that the US will get a much faster and longer leg up. It will drive the euro down to 50 to 60 cents. China has a chance to catch up with the US and hopefully will. The rest of the world, I'm not so sure. It takes institutional readiness, it takes talent, it takes a lot of things that only the US and China have. I am predicting a much faster pace of innovation because the change of the compute stack across the stack is going to drive that. And lastly, I'm predicting wealth creation in the US and a massive difference between the wealth creation opportunities within the US and US associated companies. They don't have to be physically in the US, but whoever adopts this concept of fast innovation and hard money and freedom propagating policies, which I think the US will combine in the next couple of years, whoever follows that will be able to catch up with the US and maybe, or at least in parallel, create the kind of wealth that is going to be created here. Now, this doesn't solve the question of which companies you should invest in, but it gives a macro backdrop, which means stay in the dollar and invest in companies that can take advantage of the change in the change of the compute stack, which is happening across the stack. Thank you.